In this video, we are going to be covering the last few topics in chapter 15. We're going to start by discussing lipoproteins. Lipoproteins are used for the transport of cholesterol and triglycerides in the body. So, understand that these lipoproteins are going to be composed of membrane proteins, phospholipids, and cholesterol. And that is going to be creating their polar surface. This polar surface, remember that the circle here, this is the glycerol phospholipid. And remember that the polar head, meaning the ionized amino group in the amino alcohol, is the one that is going to be able to be solubilizing in water. Then, remember that this has some nonpolar tails, and that's why it's able to allow those nonpolar lipids to sit inside the molecules. Remember, cholesterol and or triacylglycerols is what it is transported. Remember, having this ability to have a polar surface and inside the molecule being able to carry this nonpolar lipids allow lipoproteins to be soluble in water. And again, it's all because of these polar lipids that are in the surface, okay? And it has to do with the structure of the glycerol phospholipids that they're composed of. So, there are different types of lipoproteins, but in this class, we're only going to be focusing in two types of lipoproteins. The first one is going to be the low density lipoproteins, and then the next one is going to be the high density lipoproteins. As you can see, low density lipoproteins are known as LDLs, while high density lipoproteins are known as HDLs, okay? So, the job of the LDL is going to be transporting. This is going to transport cholesterol from liver to the rest of the body. Okay, that's why we see the arrow from liver out. Specifically here we have heart and we have muscle. Now, high density lipoproteins is going to bring back cholesterol, is going to be transporting cholesterol back to the liver. Now, understand that when it comes to this, there are the terms good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Okay, so LDLs, this is known as bad cholesterol because it's taking the cholesterol from liver to all of the organs. If that is in high amounts, and the HDLs, which is known as good cholesterol, cannot bring that excess cholesterol back to be processed, okay? Then that's what creates the plaques that have been observed when there is high amounts of cholesterol in the body. Remember that cholesterol is also the starting material of steroid hormones. And here we have examples of steroid hormones. We have testosterone, estradiol, progesterone. Now, remember that steroid hormones are going to be chemically chemical messengers that serve as communication systems in the body. Specifically, they are the ones that are going to be signaling the body that puberty is going to be occurring. So, as you can see, steroid hormones are produced from cholesterol, and we have male sex hormones like testosterone and androsterone being synthesized, and even the female sex hormone like estrogen and progesterone are made from cholesterol. Okay, now the adrenal glands also are involved, but I'm not going to talk about those specifically. Now, the reason why I mention is because people hear the word steroids and they always relate it to anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids are not synthesized from cholesterol, and they are not naturally occurring in the body. They are actually derivatives that are so molecules that have been synthesized, and they use as a starting material the molecule of testosterone. So all of these have been generated in the laboratory. They are used illegally to increase muscle mass, and they have many side effects that include fluid retention, hair growth, sleep disturbance, and even liver damage. To show you some examples of these anabolic steroids, here in the bottom I have examples of molecules that have been utilized as anabolic steroids. So the last topic that we have in this chapter has to do with cell membranes. And when it comes to cell membranes, understand that the cell membrane is going to be separating the cellular content from external environment. Cell membranes consist of a lipid bilayer. So a lipid bilayer means that we are going to have two layers of phospholipids coming together, and they're going to be interacting. So I'm just going to zoom in. That phospholipid bilayer is because the tails, of one layer versus the other are going to be interacting. Remember that those tails are nonpolar. So remember, the whole idea of like dissolves like still applies to biological molecules. So the nonpolar tails are going to be interacting with one another, and then the polar heads will be either interacting with the cellular environment outside, which contain water, or the inside of the cell, which also contains water. Now, understand that cell membranes are actually complex. Not only they are composed of phospholipid bilayer, they can have carbohydrate chains on them. They can have cholesterol. They can have proteins inside of them. So as you can see, they're very diverse. Whenever we talk about the cell membrane, we have to talk about the fluid mosaic model. Okay, and the fluid mosaic model just establishes that cell membranes are not going to be composed of one molecule. The word mosaic implies that our cell membranes is going to be composed of different things. In this case, proteins, carbohydrates, cholesterol, and the phospholipids that are part of the bilayer. Now, understand that the reason that we call it fluid is because when it comes to cell membranes, those tails are going to have unsaturated fatty acids, which it makes them cell membrane to be fluid-like rather than rigid. Okay? Remember that the presence of these proteins or carbohydrates in the cell membranes is because the surface of the cell has to communicate with hormones and even neurotransmitter, depending on the type of the cell, in order to process the messages and deal with environmental cues. Lastly, we need to talk about how are things transported inside and outside the cell. And for this, you guys need to know the difference between diffusion, facilitated transport, and active transport. Those are the three different types of transport that occur inside of cells, or that occurs at the cell membrane cells, I should specify. So, understand that diffusion specifically is going to allow particles to move from a higher to a lower concentration gradient. But these molecules are going to go through the membrane freely. What kind of molecules can undergo diffusion? Small, non-polar molecules. So for example, molecular oxygen and carbon dioxide can get into the cell by diffusion, okay? Other type of molecules are going to need a channel, meaning a tunnel, in order to get inside the cell. And whenever a molecule needs a tunnel or a channel, okay, which this tunnel or channel, it is specifically from a protein, type of protein that is called integral protein. Understand that these molecules are undergoing facilitated transport, okay? Glucose, this monosaccharide, it is known to enter the cell through facilitated transport. Understand that diffusion and facilitated transport are both types of passive transport, okay? That's why it's just said that facilitated transport is just increasing the rate of diffusion, because now we have a tunnel specifically for this biomolecule. The last type of transport that can occur in cells is going to be active transport. And in active transport, we're going to be moving ions like potassium, calcium, sodium against a concentration gradient. But the most important thing that we should know about active transport is that it requires energy. So even though we're also using an integral membrane protein for allowing this to happen, okay, so that's what active transport has in common with facilitated transport. The requirement for energy is what makes the difference between facilitated and active transport, because active transport requires energy in order to pass these ions through the membrane.